Welcome everyone. Warm welcome to you all to the workshop, Residential Rainwater Harvesting Q&A with Local Experts. My name is Megan Marcy and I'm the Water Conservation Program Manager for Bernalillo County, which is one of the partners on this workshop. This workshop builds on a project that we started last year with this same group that you see pictured, where we developed a series of training videos on how to design, construct, and maintain residential scale passive rainwater harvesting features. And for those of you who might not be familiar with this practice, passive rainwater harvesting is simply taking the rain captured from your roof or other catchment area and putting it directly into your landscape where it can be used beneficially by plants. We hope that some of you were able to watch the training videos prior to coming to the workshops, tonight's workshop. But for those of you who haven't, we hope there'll be a resource for you in the future. You can find them at bernco.gov/rainwater, and we'll put a link to those training videos and other resources in the chat for you here shortly. In this workshop, you're going to be hearing from the same 4 local rainwater harvesting experts who did the training videos, and they are Jim Brooks, Tess Houle, Judith Phillips, and Hunter Tenbrock. And they each in this training are going to present an example landscape that incorporates rainwater harvesting to show you what this stuff actually looks like and to stimulate your questions on how you might incorporate passive rainwater harvesting into your own yard. This year, we've also included a presentation from the ABQ Backyard Refuge program, and they're going to be addressing then how to incorporate wildlife habitat into your rainwater harvesting basin and your yard. So with that, I have the job of doing just a few acknowledgements. I want to list the partner organizations that have contributed to this workshop. They include Bernalillo County Natural Resource Services and Open Space, the Ciudad Soil and Water Conservation District, the Arid Lid Coalition, and the ABQ Backyard Refuge program. For the larger project, we also had some funders that provided grants. So I want to acknowledge the Alliance for Water Efficiency and the New Mexico Department of Agriculture for their funding contributions to this project. And then finally, everyone who you're going to hear speak tonight has provided substantial contributions to this training. There are 3 people that aren't going to be presenting tonight, and I just want to acknowledge them. They are Dustin Chavez Davis from the Bernalillo County Open Space Program. He's the resource specialist. Bobby Mullen, who is the new natural resource scientist too for Bernalillo County. And then the wonderful Laurel Ladwig, who is the director of the ABQ Backyard Refuge program. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Beth Stone, who's going to introduce you to the Gutierrez Hubble House, which is kind of the physical home for this training series, and also a place where we have a rainwater harvesting demonstration project that you all can visit.
Hey you all, glad to see you all here tonight virtually, but glad to see so many people here in the room. I am the site manager at Gutierrez Hubble House, which is one of the 17 Bernalillo County open spaces. So the open spaces steward our traditional farmlands, habitat, and also cultural and historic resources here in the county. And Gutierrez Hubble House is in the South Valley at 6029 Isleta Boulevard. So I'll put that in the chat. The museum is open and it's a free public resource Thursdays through Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And you can come any day of the week, dawn to dusk, to come check out our outside resources, which include our rainwater harvesting garden, as well as a number of other gardening resources. So we always love to welcome you to come do that. I'm going to highlight a couple of things that are going on right now. Right now it's New Mexico Pollinator Week, and the Department of Agriculture is featuring our rainwater harvesting basin as one of their featured projects for their week-long statewide celebration of resources that support pollinators year-round in the state, so including habitat, forage, food, and nesting spaces. We also, it's just 2 more weeks to see our exhibit, Nuestras Acequias, which is an outdoor exhibit. There's an indoor component, but you can visit and see that to learn a little bit about the history of acequias and riparian environments. So we encourage you to do that. And then this Saturday, the party continues. So if you're enjoying what you're learning tonight, come on down and meet us on Saturday morning. We do encourage you to sign up for our workshop, which will be from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And we'll drop the link to that in the chat so that you can sign up for that. And you're always welcome to come check out the space, and we would love to see you there. And I just want to give a big thank you to everybody on this project. We love our rainwater basin and all of our different gardening zones. So it's been really wonderful to have great expert advice that you all can also put to use. So welcome.
Thank you, Beth. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Blaze. I'm the education manager at Ciudad Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm here to help moderate this experience for you all. Just wanted to give you a little bit of housekeeping, understanding how we're going to flow with this workshop today. It is a Q&A, and our idea is to hopefully spark your questions, get ideas from you, and have some opportunity to really share what your experiences or what your challenges are. And to be inspired by, of course, our experts here who have a wealth of knowledge combined. It's very, very impressive to see how much they've done in this community and how much they're willing to share with you all. So we are muting everyone just for, general, we've all done Zoom a million years now. And so it's just nice to have that quiet in the background. We're going to be using chat for question and answers. So if you have any issues using chat, it's pretty simple. You're just going to go to the bottom of your screen, look for that chat icon, click on there. If you want to have it open, you'll be able to see questions as they're coming in. Just make sure you're sending them to everyone so they're not going direct messages, then not everyone can see the questions. Steve Glass, the board chair of Ciudad Soil and Water, is going to be moderating those questions. So as we're kind of moving through and seeing examples from our experts today, he will take time and pause and kind of see what questions come up and share them with the experts for them to answer. If your question does not get answered in time today, we will be recording all those questions and sending out a response from the experts. We'll have a look at those questions, put their 2 cents in, and we'll send those out alongside with a recording of this workshop as well. So you'll have some of that afterwards. And like Beth said, coming down on Saturday is a great way to get any of those unanswered questions answered as well. So I'd like to start by introducing our experts today. If you don't know who these folks are, you soon will, and be very impressed, because as I've learned working with them, their experience locally is just very powerful. So let's start with Tess. Tess, give a little wave. Tess is a landscape architect at MRWM Landscape Architects. She's a certified water harvesting practitioner through the Watershed Management Group, a wonderful resource out of Tucson, and the vice chairperson of the Arid LID Coalition. Thanks for being with us, Tess. Judith Phillips. Hi, Judith. Welcome. Judith is an ecology-inspired landscape designer, teacher, author of climate-aware gardening books, and a lover of native plants. Actually, most plants. Just doesn't discriminate, but does have a knack for the native ones locally. Hunter Ten Broek is a landscape designer. Hi, Hunter, where are you? And owner at Waterwise Landscapes, as well as a board member of 2 different sustainability-based nonprofits since 1993. Obviously very involved in this work locally. And James Brooks. Hi, James. James is trained as a certified permaculture designer and instructor. As an owner of adaptive terrain systems, Jim uses permaculture principles as a guide to the preservation of natural resources and the creation of healthy terrain systems. He is presently the designer and project manager of the Tijeras Creek Remediation Project. And if you don't know what that is, you will shortly. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to pull up this wonderful slideshow that we got. And if folks already have your questions ready to go, maybe start getting them into chat. Here we go. You'll see that okay? Well, I guess I already did the introductions. So we'll move on and we will get started with Tess.
All right, can everybody hear me? Okay. Thank you all for joining, and thank you to the organizers for putting this together for our second rainwater harvesting training. So the landscape I'm going to be quickly walking through is actually my former home, which was the first landscape that I ever designed, and really what hooked me into water harvesting and landscape design. I was a middle school teacher when I bought this house in 2012. So it was very much a trial and error process for me. So hopefully these images give you some lessons learned and also some ideas for and different approaches to solving problems that work and also that don't work. So as you can see in this photo, when I bought the house, the roof downspout, the primary roof downspout went to the driveway so that all the runoff flowed directly to the street. There was a Bermuda grass lawn with a mature pine tree there. So that was kind of the starting point. Next slide, please. And so pretty quickly after moving in, I had the lawn removed and designed a xeriscape. Again, this was my first landscape that I had designed ever, and it was technically a rainwater harvesting landscape because I had the concrete driveway removed and crusher fines put in, and it was all theoretically permeable, but it turned out that that wasn't enough to create a functional rainwater harvesting landscape. Next slide, please. And the biggest mistake that I made is not taking time to make observations first, and observations of at least 1 year of monsoon rains to see how the landscape and the neighborhood did with a ½ inch of rain or an inch of rain or an inch and a half of rain. And as you can see in that photo in the left, this neighborhood experienced flooding or experiences flooding during heavier rain events. I later looked on an aerial photo and found that this house had been built in an arroyo. So that's why the flooding occurred. So the storm drains just backed up and couldn't handle the amount of water. So had I known that before doing the landscape, I would have made very different decisions. So this is a major lesson learned, is to do very thorough observations before you actually take any steps. And on the right there, you can see the water shooting out of that gutter and into the completely insufficiently sized rain barrel during a big storm. That rain barrel is 60 gallons, so it's not a small rain barrel, but and the house is pretty small. I think the roof area is 1,200 square feet. But if you actually want to capture rainwater from a storm like that, you need a much larger rain barrel. So that rain barrel ended up being more of a surge tank to kind of redirect water. You can see the overflow just gushing out water at the bottom there, and then a little hose spout to direct water to other parts of the landscape. You can also see it ponding in the driveway. So those crusher fines that were theoretically permeable quickly compacted. There was a lot of dirt in them and were no longer permeable. I did go back and install a French drain, but that was at the front end of the driveway there. So it's kind of an infiltration trench, just excavating and filling with gravel to promote infiltration to the pine tree. But for that amount of water, it didn't really it didn't really do too much. But it is a good tool to have in your toolkit for rainwater harvesting. Next slide, please. So what I did later was a retrofit of a lawn. Trying to get more water to the pine tree was the primary goal. So the first thing was having the crusher fines driveway replaced with a driveway that was 2 inches of wood mulch and then 1 inch of a clean gravel material that doesn't compact and that does let the water flow through to the pine tree roots. so that that overflow from the rain barrel, which happens pretty frequently, can still soak into the ground. And then that rain barrel water can be directed from a hose to a few small basins. So they're about 6 inches deep. And then I just filled them with pine cones and pine needles because I had a lot of them. So they don't look like basins on the surface, but they do have space to hold the water from the rain barrel. And next slide, please. And then there are also a few soil sponges that I think Jim will talk about more later that can accept water from the rain barrel and get it deeper into the soil. And those soil sponges, that 60-gallon rain barrel could drain into one of those soil sponges within an hour. So they really do promote fast infiltration. And I also put drip emitters in those soil sponges to keep the soil alive when it isn't raining or when there isn't moisture in the soil. Next slide, please. And this is a photo of the landscape in bloom in the summer. So as you can see, rainwater harvesting landscape. So all the plants in this landscape, there was a drip system for establishment, but they no longer need drip now that they are established. So they can be beautiful, provide a lot of habitat. There are always pollinators and roadrunners and birds in the front yard. And they can also look beautiful too. So there's, I think that's my last slide. Is that right, Erin? Yes, so there's a few things to do and also to not do from that example. Thank you.
Thank you, Tess. Beautiful transformation you've made. That image of the flooding was just kind of mind-blowing. Steve, do you want to hop in here with any questions?
We do have one question in the chat from Patsy and Richard regarding mulch, but I'm thinking maybe that may be more a Jim question. So I don't know if we want to ask that now or let some of the presentations go forward and then gather some questions in the chat. I can ask the question if you'd like.
I think that sounds
okay.
good.
The question is, how does mulch figure into the depth calculations for a basin? So if they want to use 4 inches of mulch in a clay basin, should the basin be 10 inches deep? Should it be dug to 10 inches deep? The question is, should the volume of mulch be added to the volume of water in calculating the basin capacity? So I think our mulch expert, well, we probably either Jim or Hunter, although I don't want to limit it to that, but there's the question regarding should the volume of mulch be included in the volume of the basin added to the volume of water?
Should I chime in then?
Chime in, Mr. Rooks.
All right. Thank you, Steve. My short answer is no. I don't really make allowances for the volume of mulch inside of a basin. My primary goal is to reduce the evaporative loss once water enters into the basin and begins to infiltrate. And to do that, I would say a functional minimum would be 2 inches of mulch. I have one photograph that'll come up in my slideshow where the mulch perhaps is 4 or 5 inches deep, just because of runoff from above ground, upslope. And the basin is got about a 28-inch depth, holding depth. And so that 4 or 5 inches of mulch totally saturates when it gets wet. Some of it floats. It just looks like a mulch surface on top of the water once it fills up. And then of course it settles back down, and all of those pieces of mulch are fully hydrated and they decompose. And so that depth of mulch seems to be totally renewable and not an issue. So I wouldn't worry about it. I obviously wouldn't recommend filling a basin full with mulch. I think that's probably overkill and not the highest use of mulch, but somewhere around 2, 3 inches, 4 inches even of mulch in a basin would sit well with me.
So Jim, actually the question was, when calculating the depth of the basin, You obviously have to dig the basin deep enough to absorb any water you might expect from your calculations from your roof. The question is, do you have to make the basin deeper to accommodate the mulch layer? So I
Okay.
think the answer to that is probably no, because the mulch is full of pores that will absorb the water, right?
Yes, and hopefully you have a little bit of what I would call freeboard on your outfall. So however deep your basin is, you're going to have some place for an overflow. And that overflow is usually lower than any other spot around the basin. You want to direct the overflow somewhere, usually, not necessarily 100% of that is the case, but and so that's your freeboard. And so if you have an inch or two of mulch that's floating, and I've never seen more than about an inch float in any of my basins. So it's an insignificant amount. And if some of that gets over a spillway, there's, you just rake it out from the next destination for the mulch if any of it left. So still the answer would be no, I don't allow for the depth of mulch inside of a basin.
All right, we have a question actually for Tess, I think. What kind of gravel do you use on the driveway that it doesn't compact?
So the gravel that I used on that driveway was called Amaretto Brown, and it's a product from a quarry in Los Lunas or Belen, a little bit south of Albuquerque, and it's a quartzite, so there's no dirt. It's a very clean product. There's not a lot of dirt or clay in it, unlike that previous gravel that I used. And so it will compact, but it remains permeable since there's no dirt to clog up the space between the rocks. And the size, I think it was a 1 inch minus. So it did have some small pieces, and then it had pieces that were up to 1 inch. So they kind of settle and lock in as you drive on them to create a more firm surface while still having space for the water to flow through and spaces in between the rocks to temporarily hold water until it infiltrates into the ground.
All right, that's all the questions. On to Judith.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll thank everybody for being here and being interested in this. I mean, rainwater is such an opportunity. If you've been outside and looked at your plants in the last few days, you'll have noticed how much the plants are happy about rain. So I chose this example because I assumed it would be different than anything else we're going to be talking about, but it is also something that comes up. I've run into this issue multiple times over the years. So in this case, there's a zero lot line. So the house on the right is the property line for the house on the left, and half the roof runoff from the house on the right and half the roof runoff from the house on the left drain into this 10-foot corridor. It's the main, it's actually a patio space for kitchen. You can't see the sliding glass doors, but where there's that little kind of corner of concrete that you can see, that's a pad in front of the sliding glass doors to the kitchen. And it runs the length of the house. Does that mean they can't hear me?
Judith, I can hear you fine.
We hear you just fine.
Okay. Well, so this isn't a place where we could put a swale because it's the main path between the front and the back, and also the plants that were planted in here originally, some of them actually died from the soil being too saturated too much, or too often. A trench was cut right down the middle of the space, so it's equidistant from each of the foundations, and it was backfilled with just round gravel because the landscape had been covered with round gravel that the person who lives here didn't want. And so we figured that that would be a way of using the gravel without having to haul it off. So sometimes you can see in the image on the left, those are trenches being cut. It's a more sophisticated kind of drainage system where there's a perforated pipe being put in that trench, and the trench will be wrapped with and the aggregate will be wrapped with landscape fabric. We didn't line the trench with landscape fabric here, but we did cover the top of the trench with landscape fabric before putting the stones down to hold it in place, in order to filter out any silt that would clog the drain over a period of time. This French drain is now probably 25 years old, and there hasn't been any problem with it not draining the water out. So because the house on the right, that's a north facing wall, that doesn't dry out as quickly as the soil along the house on the left, because that's a south facing wall. So the choices for the plants on the two sides of the wall were based on more shade on the right and drier conditions on the left. The drainage runs out to the front, and it also most of the drainage runs out into the front landscape, and any excess that there is. Before we did this, after a really severe rainstorm, water flowed into the kitchen through the sliding glass door, so it was necessary. So next slide. And I'm just going to talk about some of the plant choices. The passion flower on the left is growing over the trellis that was along the house on the right-hand side. And that's a really good butterfly habitat plant. But it could have gone also on the opposite side. Some of these plants are more adaptable to higher and lower water. And some of them actually require more water, like the scarlet clematis on the right, on the bottom of the slide. That's actually a Texas native, grows along streams and climbs up into trees that are growing in bosques along some of the creeks in Texas. That's rarely available in both the passion flower and the clematis. Usually need to be ordered in because nurseries will have them once in a while, but they're not available consistently in Albuquerque. The passion flower actually is more available down in southern New Mexico from the nurseries than it is up here. And then the compact Mahonia actually does best in terms of water use if it's shaded part of the day. And so it was used to have some evergreen interest there. It also flowers yellow in the spring, early in the spring, and bees love it. And then in the summertime, it has fruit on it that the birds will use. So in every landscape that I work on, I try, and unless somebody tells me not to, and very rarely does anybody tell me not to, I always include habitat plants, because why not? That's some of the best entertainment that you'll find. So next slide, please. So these are the plants that are on the sunnier side of the French drain, and they're lower water plants. The black dahlia is a late flowering, flowers late summer and into fall. And so that again prolongs the habitat value of that area. It has, tiny leaves and then wiry black stems that it does defoliate in the winter time, and so it's bare. I actually sometimes think of this plant as looking like crumpled up wire in the wintertime, which can actually have its own interest. It's not my favorite look, but actually a couple of people that I know have really liked it for that reason. The plant in the bottom right is lead plant, and that's actually in the Gutierrez Hubbell house. That's in our rainwater basin there. It also has fine leaves, not as fine as the dahlia, but it's a really beautiful, really elegant plant, and it flowers more in the spring and summer, and then if there's rain available, it will repeat flower over the summer. So that and bees just love both of these plants. Gopher plant is a euphorbia. It has milky sap, and so it needs to be handled carefully. Some people are really allergic to the latex sap, and so when you're working with this plant, it's a good idea to wear gloves and do not rub your eyes if you've got sap on your hands. The gopher plant blooms early in the spring. The foliage is evergreen, but not the stems that flowered. It needs to be cut back, and then the new stems are what take the place of the old flowering stems, and they last through the summer and fall and winter to the next spring when those stems flower. And so it'll form a really interesting, those wedge-shaped leaves make an interesting textural and evergreen element in the landscape. Next slide. So this dwarf Korean lilac on the left was about the only plant that didn't mind being in there when it was too wet a lot of the time. It actually was kind of stunted, and then once the drainage was improved, it actually jumped. So I think it was oxygen starved. The roots, were really being suffocated by the soil being too saturated all the time. And so that's another plant for spring interest. It also, the dwarf Korean lilac is really, I think, probably the most heat tolerant of the lilacs that are available to us to use. And another thing that I really love about this plant is it has kind of the leaves in the fall turn kind of a peachy apricot color. And so it has 2 seasons of color interest. The Arizona rosewood on the right-hand side image, you can see it behind the dwarf Korean lilac. It's actually it's at the edge of this drainage way. It's actually in the backyard. And that's there for its evergreen interest, but it also is a really active plant with all kinds of native bees and parasitic wasps in it's actually flowering now. And it's a really busy plant in the landscape. It's also a very elegant plant, evergreen, and just very graceful, fairly fast growing too for a broadleaf evergreen. And I think that's the last slide. And I wanted to talk more about individual plants because, again, I thought maybe we wouldn't be getting into that too much this time. We will be on Saturday, but plants are my thing, so of course I'm going to talk about them.
We can't stop you from doing what you love, Judith, so
Nope.
it's totally okay. So as Steve put in, we're going to move along to let the presenters get through some of their slides. let you think about what questions you have, go ahead and put them into chat and we'll address them towards the end after a few other of these presentations. So Hunter, I think you're up next.
Okay, I did things a little bit different than the other two. I sort of showed 3 different landscapes, and maybe Judith and I were thinking the same way. Oh, nobody else will do this, and then I ended up doing some of the same things. So I guess we worked together a long time. Anyway, this is a project up in Four Hills, and it's a backyard, and the backyard is actually lower than the front yard. So there was a lot of drainage off of the driveway. There was a lot of drainage. There was some drainage off of the house. There was also a pool deck and stuff there as well, which actually we cut some of the pool deck out because it was so big, it was taking up a huge part of the yard, and they wanted more garden and less pool deck. So actually some of the steppers that you see in the picture there were recycled concrete that we cut into pieces as steppers through the landscape. So this is basically a fairly simple swale with a ponding area at the end. And you can see the main focal point in this picture is a desert willow, which is sort of normally grows in washes. And so it's got its feet down in the bottom of the swale there. Then on the edges, I've got some perennials. There's some catmint. There's some moonshine yarrow. There's some creeping germander there that are sort of along the edge of the swale. And those are sort of your medium water plants there. Then there's also some lavender there as well that isn't in bloom yet, but the purple there is the catmint, moonshine yarrow is the yellow behind it, and then the plants behind the moonshine yarrow and in the foreground, the bottom right corner, are lavenders. And they do like a little extra moisture, but they also don't like their feet in the moisture all the time either. So they're a little bit off to the side. And then up on the edges, it's a little hard to tell, but up on the edges are some rosemary and some turpentine bush, which are much more xeric. They can take a little extra water, but their roots aren't going to be down in the bottom of that swale. So they've got larger cobble down in the bottom of the swale, so that when there are large runoff events, the whole area doesn't get washed away. So that's basically the focus of that. The path basically comes down, it steps down and crosses the swale there, but it's sort of floating on top of the cobble there, so the water can flow through it and around it when it needs to. Next slide. This is a couple different jobs. The one on the left is a project we did, I think, about 12 years ago. Originally, about 90% of the backyard here was concrete. It was just, everything was concrete. And they had drainage issues. They had issues with, not having enough space to actually do any kind of planting and stuff. This picture was taken, within, a few months of when the project was done. What we did is on the right-hand side of the bottom of that picture used to be a gigantic concrete patio. We got a concrete saw and we cut those into squares. We kept some of the squares there as steppers where water could run through with cobble from the canales. And then the other ones we we used as accents, and the woman wanted sort of a whimsical look here. So we used those concrete sections that we cut out in the pathway there with a bunch of, she had a bunch of oddball pavers. We cut them into different shapes and made different patterns and stuff. But basically on the water harvesting end of things, the water comes in from the right there down into this long swale. There is actually there was a lot of gravel in there too, and we recycled the gravel underneath. We did a French drain as well. As you can see, there's a small tree there at the time. It's a Chinese pistache, which is, I haven't been there in a while, but I'm sure it's very large now. That, if you're looking to the left, that's the south side. So those are shade tolerant plants there that then get their water from the swale whenever it rains there. But there's a lot more permeability to the area now than there used to be, and it's drawing from it was a large modern house. They had us. We actually had this interesting color crusher find, which I don't know that's ever there before or since. That was sort of this greenish blue we had it sort of sitting in the yard from a project that didn't happen, and it sort of seemed like the perfect match for their house there. So again, we're using a lot of recycled materials there, recycled gravel down in the French drain, a little bit of the cleaner gravel we used mixing with that cobble in that swale. On the bottom right, one of the things again, this was just as this project was installed. You know, a lot of people, when they think rainwater harvesting, think cisterns, they think, you know, rain barrels, and those are great. You know, they're fine, but any kind of system that you have, especially if it's a small rain barrel or cistern, is going to get overwhelmed unless it's a very tiny roof. It's going to get overwhelmed. So in any kind of area, and we have an 1,800 gallon tank at our office that I use to irrigate the entire landscape in front and on the side of our office. Even that 1,800 gallon tank frequently overflows. So even, you know, if you want rain barrels, that's great. Incorporate them, cisterns, all that, it's great. But you always want to put in either a swale or a French drain or a pumice wick or some other a pond as an overflow, because no matter how big your thing is, most likely it's going to overflow. We have at our office, we have 3,100 square feet of roof that all drains to one place into an 1,800 gallon tank. So if the calculations is 600 gallons per 1,000 square feet of roof, more or less, per inch of rain, if you think about that, then 1 inch of rain is going to fill that cistern if it's completely empty. And think about what we've had the last week here. It's going to overwhelm it. So along the front of our driveway there, and a lot of these things I'm talking about don't work that well in pictures because you can't see a French drain. You can't see those elements, but we have a French drain that runs like 60 feet down the length of our parking lot. That's an overflow from our cistern, and it was even that filled up with some of the rain that we just had. So what that does is that French drain, we have a series of trees and shrubs, perennials and stuff along that little bed. And every time it rains, that it overflows, it fills that French drain, and then it's saturating the root zone of those trees and plants. So it's a really, you know, we want to really make use of all the water we can. And it's hard to it's hard to really oversize your your rain basins in a small project like this. So just be thinking about this. This little swale here goes to a Chinese pistache tree. This was done about 10, 12 years ago as well. It goes to a Chinese pistache tree that's down in that basin. And there's some desert 4 o'clocks and things down in there that can handle that extra rain when they get it. So I think that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Hunter. Interesting choices, obviously, of your pictures here, because you have so many beautiful landscapes that you could have shown. So I do agree you and Judith went your own unique direction that was sort of the same. But thank you for that, Hunter. So we just have 2 quick questions that were popped into chat about, Steve, do you have those on hand real quick? And
Yes, I do.
that before we get to Jim.
So these actually apply very very much to these past 2 presentations from Judith and Hunter. So I'll ask the second question first. Where can you get the native plants you talked about besides trying to harvest them from the wild?
Oh, Plants of the Southwest. And there are a couple of other growers that sell their plants through Plants of the Southwest. They're the best locally. Osuna Nurseries has some natives. They've gotten better in the last couple of years with pollinator plants, particularly. No, Santa Ana retail is not going to retail, is the last I heard. But Plants of the Southwest is selling their plants, so the plants are available through PSW. And some, some mail ordering. I think mail ordering used to be, I used to think that it was awful. We've gotten, I think nurseries have gotten a lot better with packaging, and it's better to buy local, but if you have to, some things you can, like those clematis, the clematis and the passion flower, you can always order from a specialty tree.
All right, thank you, Judith. And Hunter, you just talked about rain barrels. So the question from Rebecca is, what are the best options for directing rainfall from a canali to a rain barrel without a lot of loss? And, many of you probably have a good answer to that, but I'll turn it over to Hunter to begin with.
Well, I mean, usually if you've got a rain barrel and you've got, if you've got a drain like in the picture that's still there, some of the different, you can get some of the gutter companies will actually, like ABC Seamless, there's other ones that will kind of help you get the right spout for what you need. So that's one way to do it. If you have a canali, another way to do it is a rain chain, which is basically a chain that attaches to the canali, and basically the water kind of sticks to the chain and directs it down into either your swale or your rain barrel or whatever. We had an interesting thing where, in our large cistern we had, because it has such huge volume and stuff, that was sort of a challenge. Like, how are we going to get it into this opening of the cistern? So we actually had custom made a funnel on the top of our a funnel shaped thing, so that when it was dripping lightly, it was going in, and then when it was coming out gangbusters, it looked like a giant waterfall. It still was going in. So you sort of have to watch to see with your canales, where does the water come down, and sort of direct it the best way to it if it's a canali. Again, you can change canales to gutters if you want to. If you can't get it all in a big rain to go into your rain barrel, you want to at least make sure that you're getting all that water into your swale, French drain, ponding area, whatever, your overflow. Make sure that all that water is going somewhere where it's put to good use. Hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Hunter. Let's give Jim some time to go because I know he's got quite a few slides in here, and then we can circle back to some of those questions. Although I did just see a question about the gate. Is it metal or wood in the picture on the left?
That's metal.
Metal. Thank you. All right, Jim, are you ready?
I am. I'll preface this by positing a statement here. I understood to have 2 slides, so I don't actually have a lot of slides.
That was my fault. Sorry.
I could have inundated y'all with slides, but we'll make good use of these 2. And thank you everybody for joining in, by the way. So these are just pictures that I took day before yesterday with the rain at the Tijeras Creek remediation project area. And this is what we call the finger basin. It's part of an expansion that we did off of the original construction. And this is the basin that I was referring to when I was talking about mulch. You can see some water there, mostly where the culverts are coming in. Culverts are coming in on the far left. There's 2 of them back there, right in the center, far left of the picture. And those actually drain a lot of area from a parking lot, and from the school. And so there's a good deal of water that comes in, and the current from that moves the mulch more towards the right in the picture. And so some of that mulch, when the water slows down and moves more slowly, the mulch then is slowly transported to the far side. There's a Rocky Mountain big tooth maple down there. That's the shorter one. There's a new maple that was planted. Nature Conservancy donated that back in the middle of April, and we put that in. I'm not sure what variety it is. I didn't get to see the label on it, so we will see as it grows what it turns into. A couple of things though. You can obviously mulch works in these basins, and as the water level goes down, the mulch goes with it. I also have fascine logs on either side of this particular basin because we had steep sides, and they were vertical. And to keep the sides of the basin from caving in and filling in the basin due to runoff from upslope to the left and to the right, we cut elm branches, gleaning them from our project area there, the Siberian elms, and we wove them into rope-like structures that woven between stakes. And that was very effective at creating habitat. But when the high water comes in and saturates all that area, it really provides a long-term habitat, not just for the plants that have taken root there, but also the animal life. Everything from lizards and snakes and that kind of thing, and birds and beetles and you name it. Lots of redworms. So it's quite the little nursery. And so during droughty times, those areas never ever dry out. And just last week, when it was still very dry and we hadn't received any rain at all after 4 months, about 4 inches down through the mulch, I just kicked with my feet and it was quite moist. So over time, these things can really hold a lot of water and provide drought resistance. Next slide, please. And last slide, as it were. I love the little cone flower or blanket flower in the foreground. That just was one of the new plants we put in April. So I had to take this angle. This is just this is a different basin, and there are many basins. I right now I'd have to count them out, but it's probably 7 or so that are completed and are aging nicely. And so we call this an integrated treatment train. And while this is a larger project scope than, say, a residential, backyard, the concepts are 100% scalable to yards. The smallest version of this I ever did was about 150 square feet backyard of a little townhouse in the Northeast Heights of Albuquerque. So you don't have to get big old heavy equipment out there. You can do all of this just as you saw in Hunter's and Judith's and Tessa's photographs. These things are so scalable. And I just want to make sure that you all, hear this thing about you can store so much more water in the soil, in the landscape, than you ever could in cisterns. And cisterns and rain barrels are still very appropriate. They work as surge basins, and said differently, any amount of water you can harvest is a positive thing. So if that's all you get, if that's all you can hold on to is a rain barrel, 50 gallons or 150 gallons or 200 gallons, something on the small side, that's still, that sure beats nothing, right? But your landscape, you can hold on to much water that way. We infiltrate just shy of an acre foot of water with a 2/10 of an inch rain event, as long as that rain event comes in a hurry, like 15 minutes or so. So, you can really focus a lot of water into your landscape. And then if you have sponges located in and around these basins and swales and bioswales, you really can drought proof your landscape. I saw that Tess mentioned putting the irrigation emitter on the sponge. I highly recommend that in residential and commercial applications. Keep that soil sponge moist, keep the biological activity going, and then when it does receive stormwater, of course, it'll get recharged, and there's nutrients in that stormwater, usually everything from leaf material to bug bodies and stuff and bacteria. So your little ecosystem that's down there is going to continually to get recharged, and that drip emitter will just make sure that it doesn't die in between droughts. Okay, I promised to keep this short at 5 minutes. I think I'm about there. Oh, looky there. There's a third photograph. Where did that come from? And you can kind of tell that this is a treatment train. These basins are located adjacent to one another, connected by spillways. Each and every one is slightly larger than the one preceding it, basically double the size of the one preceding it. So that when we get a itsy bitsy teeny weeny little rain on 16 acres of impervious surface area, we get a little bit of flow, and that flow goes right into a bioswale first. And so that bioswale is loaded with grasses and the attending bacteria and biological flora that's in there. That treats the pollution that's in that water. Those small rain events are really responsible for the majority of the pollution transport. So you really want to maximize your plant material in the places that the first water flushes get to, if you can. And then as the water cleans up, I have larger and larger basins. So you're infiltrating cleaner and cleaner water all the time. And of course, in the pictures here, you can see the biological response for yourselves. This was compacted, dry, horrible clay, wouldn't drain at all back in 2015 when we first constructed these basins. So yeah, the proof is in the picture. And I think that's it, unless somebody has questions.
Thank you so much, Jim. I just want to say to folks, if you haven't visited the site before, this Tijeras Creek remediation project, I highly recommend it. And I don't know if there's a direct way to get on the email list. Jim, that might not be your thing to volunteer, but that might be a nice way to also kind of learn about these practices, is to actually get out there at this site and do some of the work. It's all volunteer created. A lot of hands have gone into making this space work. Not to take away credit, Jim is the brains of the operation, but I know that it really inspired me to think, wow, this concept of planting the rain, I don't know if anyone said that today, but it really shows how that works at this site. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, for saying that. And yes, there is a way for people to sign up. And if you do text me or email me your email, I will forward it to Rick Hayda, and I don't have his address in front of me, or I'd give it to y'all right now. But I can forward it to Rick, and he's the keeper of the email address for volunteers. And next,
Steve put that in the chat. If you all actually, Rick's email is in the chat. If you all.
Oh, that's perfect. And we have a work day coming up. I know there's some folks in the waiting room that are Bernalillo County Master Naturalists that have been out slaving away at the TCRP, and they're aware of this. But we have a work day coming up a week from this Saturday on the 9th, I believe, of July. So that'll be from 9 until 12, 9 a.m. till 12 p.m. And all is welcome.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
So to keep us moving along, since I have the wonderful job of making sure we stay on track here, I'm going to let Megan hop back in, who is not only a professional in the context of this workshop, but also one of our rainwater harvesting ambassadors. As this program was initiated, we got people to come on board and say, I will take on this and do a project at my house. And so Megan has a few slides to show the work that she did within the last year.
Thank you, Erin. I'm definitely feeling conscious of going after Tess, Judith, Hunter, and Jim. So yes, as Erin stated, I did sign up to be a residential rainwater harvesting ambassador after the training videos were produced last summer, which meant that I committed to installing a rainwater harvesting basin in our backyard. And I wanted to share this small project with you. As Jim was saying, all of this stuff is scalable. So this is a smaller version of rainwater harvesting in a residential context. And I just have 4 slides here. The first one that I wanted to show you shows what the basin looked like as we were excavating it. And this was done by myself and my partner. The soil around the house, which is not uncommon, was highly compacted. It was just horrible. And so it was only possible to excavate it with the pickaxe. And just to say there, I think I'm sort of adopting the same lessons learned format that Tess used here with these slides of things that we sort of took away from this experience. Depending on your soil conditions, you know, grading can be very labor intensive, is the lesson learned here. And I think that's important for those of us that are taking this on as a do-it-yourself project to consider. And for us, the way we dealt with that is just by spreading that out over multiple weekends. So it took us quite a bit of time to do the excavation piece. And again, this is a small basin. You can see the downspout there from this upper story portion of our roof, draining originally into a stock tank, and that's, you know, was rerouted to the basin, but it's a relatively small area of roof and therefore a relatively small basin. Again, but it was in fact pretty time consuming. Fortunately, last year we had like a number of monsoonal events, and what was wonderful about that is it kept soaking the soil and making it easier to dig out for us as we went along. Okay, so next slide, Erin. The second slide here, I'm showing you the basin after it was planted. And so again, I'm not sure that I really emphasized that we really followed the methods that Tess, Jim, Judith, and Hunter laid out in the residential rainwater harvesting videos. So after digging out the basin, we did loosen the bottom of the basin, like about the depth of a pitchfork. And then we, instead of adding compost, we had reserved some of the topsoil from the basin and we just mixed that back in. Then we planted plants, mostly from the Bernalillo County Green Stormwater Infrastructure plant list. And Tess and Judith may want to talk about that a little bit more, but the lesson learned for me is that was just a really incredible resource to get to do better, I guess, and be more successful with the plants that we planted. We have lost 2 of these plants, but I don't think we would have had that high of a success rate if we hadn't relied on the plant list to guide plant selection. And you can see in this picture too, we did add a hose bib drip irrigation system, which is not quite finished in this photo, but the idea was to use that for plant establishment. And then subsequently we added a 4-inch layer of mulch. Next slide. Okay, so this picture shows the rainwater harvesting basin. Like, it was really serendipitous. Just after we finished it, we got a huge rain event where we had a lot of rain come through in a very short amount of time. It was 1 inch, and I can't really tell you the interval. This was at the end of July last year, but what ended up happening is we have an adjacent 1-story roof, and we have sort of some rain barrels, and then they overflow to a series of trees, but the rain was coming down so hard that it came over the gutters. It couldn't even, it overflowed the rain barrels, and it came down this pathway and ended up entering into this basin, which was not actually sized to collect water from the entire roof. So this was just after the rain event ended. The basin actually functioned pretty well. You can see how the mulch kind of, it extended past the basin a little bit, and that shows you where the water originally was when the storm ended. But I definitely just want to emphasize the advice in the videos to think about overflow, and also just to say that despite all of the careful thought we put into this, the calculations, the planning, the grading, like, you don't really know what's going to happen until it rains, and unexpected things may happen, and that's why thinking about overflow is such an important consideration. For us, the water just kind of extends out into this area that's the path, and so that worked okay for us. And we have this sort of higher area towards the house, so the water didn't actually encroach back up on the house. Okay, final slide. And this is just a picture of the rainwater harvesting basin this year. I just took this picture this week, and this is after some of the first monsoons that we got. You can see that our plants are really happy and thriving. So again, just emphasizing correct plant selection, I think, is so important. And then just sort of on a personal note for me, this has been one of the most satisfying, low maintenance, self-sustaining landscape projects that we've done in our yard in 15, actually more like 17 years of do-it-yourself landscape projects. So it's a lovely little landscape, and it works all by itself. And it is so nice to see a full rainwater harvesting basin. So that's it for my slides.
Thank you, Megan. There was a quick question pertaining to this project from Mike K. It says, why did you reroute your gutter directly to the basin instead of the stock tank?
That is a great question. We could still use the stock tank. The stock tank obviously doesn't really have an overflow. I think you could modify it so that it had one, but I'll be totally honest with you. I am just kind of tired of managing rain barrels. Like, I just love these passive systems where you don't have to do anything at all, and the water just goes directly into the landscape and gives your plants this really deep watering. So that was just a personal choice. You could definitely have done it as Mike suggested, and incorporated a rain barrel into the system, and then just directed the overflow into the rainwater harvesting basin.
Thank you, Megan.
Aaron, we also had another question.
Yeah.
For Jim. How did you get the hard clay area to allow infiltration?
Thanks. I saw that question, and I'm sorry I glossed over that during my presentation. So soil sponges was what I found to be the answer to that. Our original basins didn't drain, and they'd just sit there for 6 months, 9 months, and just evaporate water. And when I began drilling, and that's what I did, was I drilled holes, and that's open for interpretation. You can use a post hole digger if you want to, work out your upper body. And I've used jackhammers, I've used heavy equipment, tractors, but you can rent small augers and equipment. So, but I have found that about 3¼ inch or 3½ inch diameter, up to about 12 inches in diameter is good. I'm kind of settling in around 6 to 9 inches in diameter as being just a kind of a sweet spot. And then how deep? Well, if you want to develop deep soils, deeper the better. I'm limited on my own personal equipment at about 2 feet deep. But I like to put a few shallower sponges in, about 12 inches or so. And that way you have sort of a concentration in the shallow root zone for newly planted plants. And so they can make use of that. And then I intersperse deeper ones, like 2 feet deep, and then give it time. Let water soak in and work. The soils will aggregate adjacent to the sponge. And after a season, or perhaps 2 seasons, I was able to go in and drill without much resistance in the clay because the soils had already begun to develop adjacent to these sponges. So, a lot of experimenting out there to do. Try it for yourself and see how it goes. But that was my take on it. And those of you that know me know that I'm a sponge maniac. So put as many of those in as you can. And they're kind of labor intensive unless you have some power equipment, but fill it with something I used to call it no float blend. I don't believe the new owners of Soilutions calls it that anymore. I think it's a Mediterranean blend. But if you ask for no float, they'll know what you're talking about. And it's pumice compost and wood mulch basically, and doesn't subside and lasts quite a while down in the hole. And so that's what I prefer to use nowadays. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So next up, we have Natalie Sept representing the Albuquerque Backyard Refuge Project. If you weren't convinced that this is something you should be doing, you will be after her very quick presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm a volunteer with the Friends of Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge, and I know we have very little time, so I'll try to go through this a little quickly. Formerly of Plants of the Southwest, which is the native plant nursery that's based in Santa Fe, also in Albuquerque. And just really briefly, I just want to say and reiterate what Judith Phillips said, and also what an honor it is to be a part of this incredible, illustrious group of people that I have often referenced to customers and other people alike as the experts in the Southwest. So I just wanted to say again what a privilege it is to be here and participating in this with you all. Cultivated and grown plants in New Mexico have the highest chance of survival. And I think that Plants of the Southwest, having worked there, are just watching everything be cultivated and grown, and how difficult New Mexico environment can be to grow things. I just really encourage people to look for those plants that have been grown in the actual environment, soil and otherwise, and that will just really help and create thriving plants, which is what we want. So as I said, here in Laurel Ladwig's stead, she's the director of Friends of Valle de Oro, and I'm really happy to be sharing with you my own personal passion about wildlife spaces, especially in New Mexico. I think as we all know, human activity has changed and eliminated wildlife habitat. So we all, no matter how big or small your yard is, or even if you have a patio or a balcony, you have an opportunity to help with giving wildlife to invite them into your home and into your neighborhood or into your yard. And planting a simple garden is a really good way to start, and especially with native plants to help with pollinators and other species that are endangered. Next. So this guide, which you can get if you come on Saturday, actually, which may be an incentive, is an incredible resource that gives you all this information that I'm just going to skip over pretty quickly. But also I'm putting in the chat the link to all of these resources, including plant lists, which have so far been talked about by all these experts, and overlap with understanding which kind of pollinators and which sort of wildlife benefit from certain types of plants, flowers, shrubs, and otherwise that you can put in your yard or even put on your in your patio or in other places, and the kind of benefits, the multiplier effect of some of these things. So I am hoping that folks can take a look at this more in depth when you have more time. Aaron, next, please. And get a sense for just the diversity of plants that are really great to be able to attract different wildlife to your yard. Next, Aaron. Thanks. This goes into depth too about specifically the kind of plants, including the scientific name, their mature growth size, typically the kind of water usage they need. And all of these things are going to be super helpful to you as you start to design and develop your own backyard wildlife landscape. And the habitat value is another really key thing if you're thinking of specifically helping a particular type of pollinator, or you want to attract a certain kind of wildlife into your yard. Next, please. Like bumblebees, for example. A lot of questions that I got when I worked at the nursery was about how to benefit the really important population of bees. And there's so many varieties, hundreds of varieties, and certain bees actually relate specifically to different types of plants. In New Mexico, I believe there's a native bee that specifically likes globe mallow. And so even though some of these plants, they might be growing really easily in your yard, keeping some of them or paying attention to the kinds of insects and others that really are attracted to them could also be helpful. Next, please. And another resource that is really excellent, which you may or may not have already, is the iNaturalist app. And there's a great resource that is that overlaps with the Backyard Refuge program, which there's specific plant lists, and there's geography of specific areas where these plants grow most easily. And you can really cross-reference as you're trying to think about ways that you want to incorporate different wildlife habitat into your yard. Next, please. If you are passionate about this kind of work, you can also sign up to become a neighborhood ambassador. I know that Laurel and others with Vida Oro and the Backyard Refuge program really want to encourage people to participate and to advocate for why these kinds of things are so important for our local landscape and local wildlife. I think all of the presentations that were made today show you great examples of what can happen when you are thinking about conserving water, but also about native plants, and how each of these yards really showcase a great example of what we can do in order to help pollinators and other animals alike. Next, please. So one of the cool things about this program is that you can get your very own plaque in your yard to showcase the fact that you have gone through this index and you understand what is required in order to have a backyard refuge in your home, in your own space. And there are very simple steps in order to do that, and it's a low barrier to entry. I know that this resource is a bit daunting as an index for all of these different things, but having very simple things, for example, having a native drought-resistant plant, which are some of the wonderful ones that Judith pointed out, or having a very small even source of water for either birds, or you could also do something for bees, which is really important, by having just a shallow dish of water with a rock or something else in it so that they can land. Those two simple things can get you status as a backyard refuge. And so it's not required for you to have some big sprawling yard. You can have something much smaller than that in order to participate and be part of the mosaic of these refuge programs. Next, please. Here are some other very specific guides in order for you to, if you want to level up and how specific you want to get, or ambitious, and what kind of a wildlife you're providing. I know at the place where I was before, I was able to have a really robust backyard with lots of different, both habitat for different animals, but also water sources. And understanding the depth of those kinds of things is something that we could probably talk about for 20 minutes, but it's a great resource in order for you to, if you want to just go online, or I'll be sharing Laurel's email address if you have specific questions. And I think that's the best way to try to understand. I think if you, any of these projects that were showcased today, they would absolutely qualify as being a backyard refuge. Next, please. And then one other aside that I'll mention, which is one of the great additions, one of the great things to think about is that being a, quote, lazy gardener is one of the best ways to protect wildlife habitat or wildlife in general. I know that something that I'm really passionate about is trying to get people to tolerate pests and not use certain pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. I think that the bee population certainly has been one that it's highlighted and how they've been under threat, but leaving leaves on the ground is a wonderful way to both just create compost and coverage for plants, but also it creates shelter for some of this habitat or some of these wildlife. And I think like embracing wildness is something that I really appreciate, and it's part of my aesthetic. So I think that that's something that there might be parts of your yard that if you can let go wild or turn into a meadow or let grasses grow, that's actually going to provide food and sustenance for everything from insects to birds. Next, please. Great. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share a little bit about the great work that's happening with Friends of Valle de Oro and this wonderful wildlife preserve. I hope that folks will reach out to Laurel specifically if you have questions, but I'll do my best to try to help you out, and I'll put her email in the chat too. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. That was a wonderfully concise presentation on the project. And I will say, as I learn more about this project and how it aligns with, what we're doing with the passive rainwater catchment, it's just, they go hand in hand. So as Steve pointed out, you could be both a backyard refuge ambassador and a rainwater ambassador and share all this information with your neighbors and help them understand why you might have some leaves on the ground at a certain time of the year. So I'm going to open this up for questions. So I know that we've kind of had a few that I think we need to get to. Steve, if you've got those ready that maybe haven't been answered. And I know that you probably don't have to say this, but there are no dumb questions. If you're just thinking, I'm interested in this, I'm not quite sure where to start, even just thinking about the landscape that is around you at your home, your residence, and what kind of challenges you might find, that would be a great way to kind of start getting the experts' advice. We have about 7 more minutes, so that gives us a little bit of time. Steve?
I will say, Aaron, that I don't have any outstanding questions here. Most of them have been already addressed in the chat. So,
okay. Well, that's great. I do want to recognize that a couple people put in chat that, or I think one person has a backyard refuge, is that ambassador. Was it Cindy or Lissy who shared that?
I do too. I got the,
yes. Raise your hand if your backyard is certified.
Absolutely. Judith, yeah. Tess, probably.
Okay, Steve, stuff is popping into chat.
Yeah, I see that, but let's see. How can the most recent one, how can a rain chain be attached to a canali? And that's very simple. It just screws onto the bottom of the canali, about a ½ an inch back from the lip of the canali. That's easy. And they're pretty. Rain chains can be just gorgeous with, like plastic jewels or glass jewels, whatever. They can be very pretty. And when it rains, they're just gorgeous to watch. So very simple.
One thing though, you need to anchor it on the bottom so that it doesn't whip against the stucco and.
Okay, yeah, bolted at both ends.
And also, don't forget to put a hole. If you drill a hole, most of them have you put a hole in the bottom of your canali in the wood. Drill a hole, and then there's an attachment that kind of squeezes the rain chain into place up there at the top. You put a small dam at the top side of your canali on the outside past the hole, about an inch or so it holds back a little bit of water and directs it down the hole, and then it goes down the chain. If you put it right on the lip of the canali, you're only getting the water that intercepts that chain right at that point. So I find it advantageous to have a hole in the bottom.
Okay, good idea. Tess and Judith, can you elaborate on how you identified where you should put the plants in a rainwater harvesting basin? Inundation zone versus transition zone versus high ground. Did you look at where native plants grow in the natural habitat? And think about where that correlates to the zone in a basin.
That's the best place to start. And then the list that Natalie showed, and then Burnco has a list on the website. There are a lot of, I prefer the local lists to anything that's national or even statewide, because I mean, there are just so many different niches that we're accommodating. So anyway, the first thing to do is go out hiking and look
Yeah.
around.
And
Okay.
the GSI plant list that I think Megan posted the link to in the chat, or you can find it by going to burnco.gov/rainwater, is one of those local lists that Judith is talking about. And we'll talk more about how to use that list on Saturday if you can join us at the Gutierrez Hubble House.
Okay, Jim, could you say something about how you work toward fire safety as well as water retention? Of course, water retention, fire safety, very closely related topics.
I'm not sure the direction you're going with that question, Steve. We're talking about fire resistant plants or just the landscape in general.
Well, Mike is actually concerned. It's actually was Kathy that posed this question, I think, in response to one of Mike's question, who said, "I'm happy to do this stuff as long as it doesn't increase the threat of the wildfire threat to my house. Like what Megan built is a bunch of plants next to her house, and out in the East Mountains, you may not want to do that. So the question would be, how do you balance fire safety and and plants in a water harvesting basin?"
Thanks. Yeah, perfect. Yes, in the East Mountains where I live, I'm scrupulous about keeping large flammable trees away from my house, and of course all of the rest of it, metal roof and fascias and soffits and stucco and concrete sidewalk around the house, or gravel for a distance. And I keep weeds and dry material away from the house so it doesn't burn right close to the house. And then I ease into the landscape as it goes further out, and it gets denser and heavier the further away from the structure. With regard to swales, if you have a swale, you probably will have a berm. Not necessarily, but I would say most of the time. And berms are one of those things that if you have it mulched and not, whether it's vegetated or not, if it's mulched, the dry mulch is capable of carrying a small ground fire. And so I don't run my swales generally directly underneath canopies of trees that are flammable. And by that, it's mostly pine trees, the piñones, the junipers. And if I do, I'm going to have those limbed up so that the real short flame lengths, most of those, a mulch can't carry a flame length that's very high, nor is it very hot, but it'll burn like a slow burning wick. And if that wick leads to ladder fuel, dry material that's going to flame up, think tumbleweeds in Albuquerque, kochia, you can get a pile of those 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet deep if the winds are blowing from the right direction. That kind of thing you'd want to certainly just get rid of, because that is a real fire hazard. But yeah, mostly once these things become well vegetated and hydrated, they do take more energy out of fire than they give fire. So as long as you're not directing it to something dry and really close to your house or other flammable thing, I think you're pretty safe.
Good answer. They have one slightly off-topic question. Where did I see that one?
Steve, I think
Yeah.
Megan did respond to that question
Okay.
about
All right.
water catchment for
Okay.
potable use. And some resources were shared in the
Thank-
chat. And Bernalillo County is a great resource for that kind of information as well. We are at time now. Official timekeeper here. So if you have any final thoughts or questions, if you want to pop them into chat right now and we can respond to them in our kind of post workshop email blast with a recording of this, that would be great. We will grab those questions. But I just want to say thank you so much for everybody's time. I mean, we had a great turnout today, which is just so exciting for all of us who partner on these projects, who obviously is our passions, to know that our community is getting interested, other neighborhoods, other residents, are hoping to participate in this and really transform our city and community on a larger scale. So I hope that we do see some of your faces on Saturday at the Gutierrez-Hubble House. I believe, did we share the registration in the chat? And maybe that link is open for more registrations. And again, thank you so much. Thank you to the experts for all your time. And I know it was short, but we'll just keep working on this and bringing people together over passive rainwater harvesting.